Hi, my name is Akshat, and in this video, I'm going to show a demo of my homework 2 for CS441. So the problem statement for this homework was to create a Lambda function and two different clients that would interact with it. So the first client would be the gRPC client, and the second one would be REST-based client. So uh, these two clients will essentially perform two tasks, um, uh, make two different calls to the Lambda function, and the Lambda will perform two different tasks. So the first one was to check for a timestamp in the log file. And the log file that we're using here is same as the homework one's log file, and we are performing operations on that. So the first task was to check whether a timestamp is present in the log file at all or not. And the second one was if a timestamp is present uh, based on the given interval by the user. So the user gives us the timestamp and the interval, and based on that interval, we have to match the pattern of the log file, the logs, and return them back to the user. So these were the two tasks. And then we had another thing, that is we had to run the log generation program on an EC2 instance. So what that means is that we will have an EC2 instance running on AWS, and we will upload our log file generation program on that. And uh, this is my EC2 instance that I've started on AWS, and I have to uh, basically run that program. And when the logs are generated, I have to copy it to the S3 bucket from where I can perform operations using Lambda function. Now I'll quickly SSH into this uh, EC2 instance and then like start by log generator program. So yeah, this is the IP address, and you can start. So my log generator is in this folder. Um, spelling mistake. CS441. Yeah, now we can start it using sbt clean compile run. Yeah, so it is going to take some time to start. Meanwhile, I'll explain what it does. Once the logs are generated uh, in the EC2 instance, I have added a script, Scala script basically, which would copy those logs from the EC2 instance to the S3 bucket. So I've used Amazon's packages here basically to do that. And here we can see that s3.put object, this function puts the object from the EC2 instance, which will be given in this path, and then puts it to the buckets S3 path that I have defined in my configuration file here. So uh, yeah, so it is going to start now, and it is going to take around half an hour to complete. So meanwhile that happens, I'll go and explain what my Lambda function does and how it works. So uh, this is my Lambda function named analyze log file, and I have connected it to a API gateway basically for using the HTTP request. So it has given me this endpoint, which I can give parameters to it, and it will return me the required responses. Uh, so let's go ahead and look at the code here once. So what this does is there is just one Lambda function. It takes requests from either the REST client or the gRPC client. So I've used a try except block to do that. Basically, what happens is when a HTTP request is coming, it can search for the query string parameters, uh, 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 parameter in the object, request object, and if that is found, it will go for that HTTP request. Otherwise, it will perform the gRPC request, which is directly attaches the parameters directly to the event object. Now, this is pretty straightforward. The return values. Uh, I have two tasks. So one is check if the timestamp is present, and the other is to return match logs. So this these values basically handle the errors. If let's say if timestamp is found for this value, then it will return the status code 200 and a message that the timestamp was present in the logs, and a MD5 hash code of that particular timestamp. I'll quickly explain how the searching happens in my function. So I'm using binary search. I have loaded the logs from the S3 bucket in a logs array, and I'm performing binary search to like uh, uh, search over the indexes in the array. Now we have two parameters that we are going to use. The first is timestamp, and the second is DT, which is the interval in which we have to search. Now this is now since the log file is already in a sorted order, that is the first timestamp will always be smaller than the second one and the next ones and so on. So uh, we already know it is in sorted order, so we can go on and perform binary search without any other operation on it. Now, uh, uh, there might be a case that a timestamp that the user has inputted isn't necessarily present in the log file because it is not continuous logging. We are having some gaps in the timestamp value. So what my function does is it finds the closest index of the timestamp where closest index to the entered timestamp. So this function does that and returns that closest index in this mid file, mid variable. And then using that mid, we find the logs to the back and the front of it using that length of the interval. And these functions are just used to search for the message or basically return the uh, logs matched, pattern log matched, uh, pattern matched logs. And we also have a hash code here that I've used using MD5 library from Python. So that was most of the things about the Lambda function, and I'll explain how the gRPC client works. Let's see if the login has started. Let's just run this again. Okay. This is my gRPC client. Now I've written this in Python, and this is the protobuf file for it. It is pretty straightforward. We can see that there are two RPC services defined here. That is one to check message presence based on the timestamp, and the second is to get matched logs based on the timestamp request. And these are the messages uh, that are defined here. So the timestamp request will be taking timestamp, the interval, and the log file name, and getx. Getx is basically what operation we want to perform, uh, whether to search for the timestamp or get the match logs. And these are the return values for timestamp. For the from the Lambda function. The first is if the timestamp is present, it will give us a value that yeah, it is present or it is not present. And the second is the status code, whether it was successfully executed or not. And similarly, the matched logs. This is an array of matched logs, and this is the status code. So for the server, yeah, so our logging has started. You can see that here. So the gRPC client is basically a combination of a server and a client. So gRPC server basically takes the request from the gRPC client and uses that request to make a call to the Lambda function. That using the Boto3 library of AWS, which is an SDK for performing AWS operations in Python. Now, so the uh, so the functions are generated. The stubs were generated using the protobuf files, and I am using those parameters here for sending the responses to the client. For get match logs, you can see that we have used this match logs variable that we had defined here. So we'll quickly see how the Lambda call looks like. That is this thing. Lambda will make a client from Boto3 and put the payload from the that came in as the request from the client and forwarded to the Lambda function. And this is the ARN that we use to invoke the Lambda function. And these are pretty straightforward. Basically, the functions checks or gets the logs using these functions. And one look over the client as well. So this is the client file, and we can see there are two requests that we have made to the gRPC server. The first is to check the message presence, and the second is to get match logs. And these are the parameters that I have hard coded as of now, and we can change it as we make the request to the Lambda function when our logs are generated. Now that was about gRPC server, gRPC client, and let's go over to the REST client in Scala. Yeah, so the REST client basically takes in the parameters that are required to make the REST call to the Lambda function, and this uses the API gateway's URL that was generated by the API gateway and assigned to us. So we can see that it uses the function URL, which is defined here in my config file as well. So it combines the function URL with the other parameters to form the whole URL to the endpoint of the Lambda function. Now, the first request is about checking whether the timestamp exists or not, and the second one is about getting the logs that are matched to the pattern. Yeah, so that was all about the REST client. Now let's see the logs that are being generated. All right, so this is going to take some time, and I'll be back after it completes. So a log file is finally created here in the S3 bucket that we defined in the configuration file. So the bucket is this one, homework to AW. And this is the folder where the log file generator copied the log file to. Now we can go ahead and perform our client requests to the Lambda function and see whether they work or not. Now let's start with the gRPC server. So uh, this is the one. Let's see, the gRPC client. So the gRPC client can be started as follows. Uh, we have to put Python function server.py. This will start up our server, and to make the client request, we can simply put Python client.py. Now, I had given these parameters for searching the log, searching in the log file. So we can see that the result for this is the following. Like these were the log files for the timestamp 22/8/42. Now, let's say if we do not have a timestamp in the log file, if it is out of bounds, now that should throw up an error that the time was not found, timestamp. Yeah, so we can see that for the second one, the status code is 404, and we did not receive any log in the log array. Now let's go. We can start with the REST client. So for the REST client, I have defined the parameters as follows. The same one that we use there. 1 minute here, 1 minute of time interval starting from this timestamp, and let's go and put gd clean compile run. So here are two requests. The first one is for the first function, and the second is the second function to get all the logs. Yeah, now we have the result here. Let's see, this was search for 1 minute of time interval, so that is 2 minutes total, and that's why it's so huge. So the logging was done here, and after that the response came. That is the timestamp is present in the logs, and for the second one, the response came that the logs, the pattern match logs are these. Okay, now let's say we do not have the timestamp in the log file. It should throw up an error. And in Scala, it just throws up a file not found exception. So I had to handle it manually. Yeah, now it is calling. And yeah, so the timestamp is not present in the log file. We got the exception error. Okay, so that's about all for this project. And if you need any instructions to run it, I'll be updating it in my README file in GitHub. And that's all for now. Thank you.